How would I sum up Steve?
That's a lot to ask.
Well, there are so many stories about Steve.
Well, it's not easy to sum up Steve.
Do you have any favorite stories about Steve?
No.
I used to work in an office building where the CDC pledge to the American people was on a plaque, and it was up on the wall by the door. I've been thinking a lot about that pledge recently, and I realized that many of Steve's personal characteristics and qualities, as well as his commitment to science and service, really embody all aspects of that pledge.
Steve has been, when it wasn't politically correct necessarily, just because he knew it was the right thing, a friend and an advocate for women at CDC.
He made every decision with fairness, absolutely at the top of his mind, and he was committed to social justice.
When we look at the EIS class and how it has evolved over the last 30 years, clearly it has become one of the most diverse groups of people in public health. And that happened because of Steve's leadership.
I went and interviewed with Steve Thacker. And in that interview, I shared with him that I was pregnant. And his reaction was wonderful. He said he was delighted and proceeded to pull out pictures of Maria, sharing how wonderful his little girl was. Although he had told me how delighted he was that I was having a child, and he shared that joy. He came over within 2 weeks of her birth and cooed over her as appropriate, and then said, by the way, here are some papers. I really hope you can get to these soon. And that was Steve. Productive, happy, wonderful.
Steve has a terrific dry sense of humor. Steve's daughters went to St. Pius, so we were standing outside the elevators at Century Center, and he said, David, did Maria decide which school she's going to? I said, she didn't take St. Pius, she went to the other school. And he said, would you mind waiting for the next elevator?
When I think of Steve, I think of what Jack Buck, the old St. Louis Cardinals broadcaster, said about Stan Musial. When you first hear about this guy, you say, it can't be true. Then when you first meet him, you say, it must be an act. But then as you watch him and you see how he performs and how he comports himself, you say, he's truly one of a kind. There'll never be another like him.
Steve is renowned for his scientific prowess, his attention to detail, his delivery of excellent products. As a scientist, he's a superb practitioner of epidemiology.
He could be the postage stamp for the U.S. Public Health Service or for CDC. He's what every EIS officer aspires to be.
I think he is the person primarily responsible for developing the scientific base for public health.
I know of no one who is more committed to the mission of the CDC and to public health than Steve Thacker.
We would try to talk about things that I thought were not work, and so one of Steve's passions was coaching girls' sports teams, and I'd always try to ask him about that. About the third or fourth time we talked about it, he began to tell me about all of the epidemiological research he'd been doing to determine whether or not warming up before exercise for these girls was a good or bad thing. And my first thought was, oh my goodness, I've been trying to talk non-work to him, and actually I've been talking to work. And then I realized, no, actually epidemiology is Steve's passion.
I think one of the things that's so remarkable about Steve is his comfort with talking with people, his comfort with really tough data to understand, and his deep commitment to CDC. It comes through in everything he does.
Have you ever seen Steve in a tie?
I don't think I ever saw Steve in a tie.
I have never once seen Steve in a tie.
One occasion in New York during the EIS 50th, he got me good because he came to a black-tied gala with a tieless tux.
Somehow, with a black t-shirt and a jacket, he looked formal.
His standard substitute for a necktie, a turtleneck shirt.
In a LL Bean polo shirt, because that was his real uniform.
I don't think Steve knows what a tie is.
I would sum him up as a symbol of strength and leadership.
Honest.
Steve is fair, he's humble, and always optimistic.
Iconic.
He's just such a strong advocate for CDC and for public health.
He's a mensch. He's selfless.
Devoted public health servant.
Science-based.
Generous.
Obsessive reader.
Dedicated. He absolutely loves movies.
Devoted.
He's solid as a friend, solid as an epidemiologist, solid as a public health person.
The heart and soul of EIS.
Inspirational.
For me, Steve is a public health hero.
Inspiring.
They don't come any better.
I'm a great believer in social DNA. What continues on quite different than biological DNA. And I think of all the people he mentored, and of course his social DNA continues on in what they will teach, but it'll continue on in all the people they in turn teach. So social DNA goes on forever. And I think that's a very happy legacy for a very happy person, and I continue to say thanks, Steve.
Thanks, Steve.
Gracias, Steve.
Thanks for everything, Steve.
Thanks, Steve.
Thank you.
Thank you, Steve.
Thank you, Steve.
Thanks for everything.
Thank you, Steve.
Thank you.
Thank you, Steve.
Thank you, Dr. Thacker, for everything.
Thank you, Steve.
Thank you, Steve.
Thank you, Steve.
Thank you, Steve.
Thank you, Dr. Thacker.
Thank you, Steve.
Thank you, Steve.
Thank you, Dr. Thacker.
Thank you.
Thank you, Dr. Thacker.
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 Thank you, Dr. Thacker.